All right, so today I will, and let's read this together. Today I will learn about the 7 continents so I can prepare myself for the quiz on Tuesday next week. Oh, a quiz. So we are going to have a quiz on Schoology, obviously, next week. You're going to have to memorize all of the 7 continents and then the 5 oceans, okay? And you're going to have to make sure you spell them correctly. Also, so I can understand the basic geography, history, and culture of the regions we'll study in this class. So every unit is going to be broken down based on the different continents, okay? Next, I will know I have it when I can tell my friends and family one important or famous thing from each continent or region. So you might want to write some stuff down or just try to remember. Maybe there are things you already know, but there's lots of cool things about like culture and geography, like beautiful places you can go visit in those continents and countries, and also animals. So I think today should be pretty interesting. Hello, this is Mr. Reiner, and today we're going to learn a little bit about the continents, okay? So the reason why we need to learn these is because the whole class, this whole year, World Cultures, is going to be broken up into the different continents, okay? So we're actually going to start in North America and work our way around. I think we're going to go North America, South America, Europe, Africa, Asia, Australia, and Oceania. And I don't know if we're learning about Antarctica very much, but that's just because there are no countries there, and nobody really lives there or calls Antarctica home. So you need to memorize these. You need to memorize the spelling, okay? And we're going to have a quiz on them next week, okay, on Tuesday, okay? And that's subject to change, but it should be Tuesday. All right, so first of all, North America, South America, Africa, Europe, Asia, Australia, and Antarctica, okay? Now, Australia, you can see how it also says Oceania. You can call it whatever you want, Australia, or you can call it Oceania, or you can call it both together. Some people also call it Australasia, all right? In the video we're going to watch in a second, that's what they call it, all right? But let's go over this one more time. And now make sure you realize that North America, they're actually 2 separate words, right? South America, 2 separate words. Everything else, just 1 word, all right? So, North America, South America, Europe, Africa, Asia, Australia, Antarctica. All right. And we also need to learn the oceans, okay? So let's take a look at those. So Pacific Ocean, Atlantic Ocean, Indian Ocean, okay? 3 oceans. There's also the Antarctic Ocean, so that would be a 4th one. And there's the Arctic Ocean at the top. They're not written on here, okay? So a total of 5 oceans. Pacific Ocean, Atlantic Ocean, Antarctic Ocean, Indian Ocean, and Arctic Ocean. These 3 are the main ones, okay? So you need to know those as well for your quiz, okay? All right, so let's go ahead and watch a video about these.
What continent is it? What continent is it? Look, what continent is it?
It's Asia.
What's this continent?
It's Africa.
And look, what's this continent?
It's Europe.
And this continent?
It's North America.
And what's this continent?
South America.
Here, what's this continent?
Australasia.
Asia, Africa, Europe, North America, South America, and Australasia.
Asia is the Earth's largest continent, and it occupies nearly 1/3 of its total land area. Asia is Earth's most populous continent as well. It's home
So this is actually Shibuya in Tokyo, Japan, and I used to live about 20 minutes from there.
to about 4.5 billion people, or roughly 60% of the world's total population. The mainland of Asia constitutes the eastern part of a much larger landmass known as Eurasia. Today, the lands of Asia are divided up into about 48 countries that possess various systems of government, including hereditary dictatorships, democratic republics, and absolute monarchies. Asia's population is made up of an incredible array of cultural and ethnic groups that speak several hundred different languages. Asians are followers of a wide variety of religions as well. This is not surprising, considering that all of the world's major religions, including Buddhism, Islam, Hinduism, Christianity, and Judaism, were founded in Asia. Today, Asia is home to many of the world's most modern and dynamic cities.
And this is Singapore. I actually went to Singapore last year, and we did a road trip, which was cool because we actually drove across the country in 15 minutes. That's how small it is. It's kind of like an island.
And lots of small, culturally and architecturally diverse towns and villages as well. Asia hosts some of the world's largest and most rapidly growing economies. But huge regions of the continent remain economically underdeveloped by 21st century standards.
I've never been to China or India, but they look really cool. I love Indian food, lots of curries.
Because of its enormous size, Asia is geographically quite diverse. Its landscapes include the amazing sculpted rice terraces and lush rainforests of its southeast. Huge deserts cover large areas of the continent. The world's tallest mountains, the Himalayas, are located in Asia, as are the wide-open grasslands of Kazakhstan and Mongolia.
I've had students from Kazakhstan in Central Asia, and it seems like a very interesting area as well. Not a lot of development because the Soviet Union decided not to put any effort in there really, and most of the economy comes from oil.
And the huge taiga conifer forests of eastern Russia. Because the lands of Asia extend from north of the Arctic Circle to south of the equator, they are subject to a wide range of climatic conditions. For example, frigid Arctic and subarctic climates dominate most of Asia's north, while mild temperate climates exist in some of its coastal areas.
So if you didn't know, I used to live in Japan. I lived there for about 4 years. I'm also fluent in Japanese and have been teaching Japanese as well for about 3 or 4 years now.
A warm, very moist tropical climate is present in much of its southeast. And extremely hot and dry desert climates exist in several of the continent's southwestern nations. Africa is the second largest and the second most populous continent on Earth after Asia. Its 1.2 billion culturally and ethnically diverse people speak over 2,000 different languages and live in 56 different sovereign nations. The African continent covers about 6% of the Earth's surface and possesses several quite notable features. These include the Sahara Desert, which is the world's largest and hottest desert. Several huge lakes, including Lake Tanganyika, seen here. and some very large rivers, including the Nile, the world's longest river. Lying near the banks of the Nile are the great pyramids and temples of ancient Egypt, which are some of the most magnificent historic structures on Earth. The African continent possesses huge tropical forests, and it has enormous expanses of grass-covered plains where the world's largest populations of wild animals can be found, including elephants, zebra, giraffes, lions, leopards, Cape buffalo, and wildebeests. Scientists believe that the first human beings lived in East Africa many hundreds of thousands of years ago, and that over time, some of their descendants migrated away and went on to populate the very farthest reaches of the globe. So in January, when it's summer in the far southern nation of South Africa, Morocco in the far north will often be having chilly winter weather. Africa is unfortunately the most troubled and underdeveloped of the continents by almost any measure.
So I actually have another student who used to work for the Japanese embassy in Kenya, and she used to work with lots of different people providing aid from Japan into Africa. They would build elementary schools and clinics and pharmacies and that kind of thing. So it's pretty interesting. Put in the chat right now if you know what an embassy is. What is an embassy? And you can talk about that with your teacher right now if you have any questions.
The enormous scale of Africa's troubles are due mostly to corrupt governments and police, as well as to brutal ethnic and religious wars that have brought death, destruction, and homelessness to millions of people. However, in spite of its very serious problems, several regions of the continent possess abundant natural resources and are experiencing steady economic growth as well as rapid urbanization. And these two important trends could end up improving the lives of many African people. North America is the Earth's third largest continent and occupies about 16.5% of its total land area. The mainland of North America starts up in the tundra along the icy shores of the Arctic Ocean, and it ends over 5,000 miles or 8,000 kilometers to the south in the very warm tropical forests of Central America. So it's no surprise that a very wide range of climatic conditions can be found here. In its northern lands, the continent can be over 3,000 miles or 5,000 kilometers wide. But in its south, on the Isthmus of Panama, it's only 30 miles or 48 kilometers across. And it was here back in the early 20th century that the Panama Canal was created to provide a time-saving shipping route between the Pacific Ocean and the Caribbean Sea. North America is the Earth's fourth most populous continent and is home to around 570 million people, or roughly 7.5% of the world's total population. Geographically, the most dramatic region of the North American continent consists of its rugged western mountain ranges that begin in the U.S. state of Alaska and run all the way down the continent. The continent's second major geographical region, which is an enormous area of broad central plains, lies to the east of these mountains. This territory consists of fairly flat grasslands and farmlands where crops of wheat, corn, and soybeans are grown that are exported all around the world. The central region is also home to the Great Lakes, which, when taken together, hold about 21% of all the surface freshwater on Earth. Chicago, seen here, along with a few other large American and Canadian cities, rises up on the shore of this body of water. The third major region of North America consists of its eastern mountain ranges. These mountains are older, much less rugged, and are of lower elevation than most of those in the West.
So right now we need to talk about the term elevation. Go ahead and put in the chat if you know what the word elevation means. What does elevation mean?
The third major region of North America consists of its eastern mountain ranges. These mountains are older, much less rugged, and are of lower elevation than most of those in the West. The eastern mountains are mostly covered with forests of deciduous hardwood trees, while on the opposite side of the continent, the lower slopes of the U.S. and Canadian mountain ranges are typically covered with conifer forests.
So these mountains, the Appalachian Mountains in the east, are much, much older. And when the rain falls, okay, it actually slowly eats away at the mountains. You can think about when people climb on top, or animals or whatever, trees, then maybe you take a rock at the top of a mountain, a tall mountain, you throw it down, or you roll it down the mountain. Well, that rock's not coming back up to the top, right? So slowly, over thousands of years, these mountains become shorter, actually. And so that's what happens. So if you go to like Tennessee, West Virginia, Kentucky, that kind of part of the country, and they're more, all the way up into New York. But all of those mountains are going to be much shorter and much more round than the ones you'll see out west. They're very, peaked and much, much taller. The ones in like Colorado, Wyoming, that sort of thing.
Large areas of desert exist in much of the West, especially near the U.S. border with Mexico. These very dry lands are frequently home to a wide variety of cactus plants and become extremely hot in the summer. Other cooler desert areas, such as Monument Valley, seen here, that's located in the U.S. states of Arizona and New Mexico, lie further north. So the last couple springs I've been to the Monument Valley area. It's also the Four Corners area. So it's the only place in the country where 4 states come together at one point. You can actually go and stand right there. But I was really surprised, because it went in March, spring break, and it just how cold it was. You think of a desert, you think hot. Well, no, that's not true. Deserts, and even when I was living in Australia, the same thing. It's desert, but you go up in the mountains and it's really cold because you have high elevation, right? Also, the further north you go, the cooler the weather is, right? So, but the fact that something is a desert only comes from the amount of rain or precipitation. Could even be snow, right? So the amount of rain or the amount of snow that falls in that place is very, very small, which is why there aren't a lot of plants, which is why there's a lot of rocks, which is why there's a lot of sand sometimes, okay? And so animals have to adapt to that. It's very, very interesting. I mean, I love the desert. It's very, very interesting. The North American mainland is home to many huge rivers, including its longest, the Mississippi, which drains much of the central region of the continent, and the mighty Columbia, seen here, which is the largest river of North America's west. South America is the Earth's 4th largest continent in total land area and is roughly triangular in shape. Its northernmost coast borders the Caribbean Sea. Its eastern coast runs along the Atlantic Ocean, and its western coast runs along the Pacific Ocean. The equator cuts across South America, about 750 miles down from the base of the Isthmus of Panama, where the continent begins. Climatically, this means that the northern and central parts of the continent are warm all year round at lower elevations. Moving further south, the climate gradually becomes milder and more temperate, and eventually, South America actually becomes quite cold. In fact, frigid Cape Horn, at the southern tip of the continent, is only about 620 miles from the shores of icy Antarctica. South America is home to 423 million people, or roughly 5.5% of the world's total population. From the 1500s up until the early 1800s.
So does anybody know what flag this is? Go ahead and put it in the chat if you know what it is.
A collection of European colonies
What flag? It's a flag of where? What country? It's a country. Well, some of you may have said Texas. I don't know because I'm in the past for you. But anyway, I'm assuming that some thought it was Texas, but it's actually not. Remember, the Texas flag has this blue part that goes all the way down, and then it has the star right there, okay? So this is actually Chile, or however you want to say it, Chile, whatever, C-H-I-L-E, and it's a South American country. Actually, I'm going to show you. Right here. It's very narrow, and the reason why is because it got all kinds of mountains right here. Those Rocky Mountains that continue down. They're called the Andes Mountains, right? But anyway, Argentina then on the east side of the mountains is very flat.
From the 1500s up until the early 1800s, South America was merely a collection of European colonies and had no independent nations. Spain and Portugal were the most important colonial powers, and their traditions exerted the greatest influence on South American culture. As a result, Roman Catholicism is the predominant religion in South America today. The continent is divided up among 12 sovereign, constitutionally democratic nations. The first is Brazil, which is Portuguese-speaking. Then comes Spanish-speaking Bolivia, Paraguay, Uruguay, Argentina, Chile, Peru, Ecuador, Colombia, and Venezuela, a country which possesses the world's largest reserves of petroleum. Guyana is South America's only English-speaking country, and Suriname is its only Dutch-speaking one. Tiny French Guiana is a colony of France and is not a sovereign nation. Out of all of these, Brazil is by far the biggest, occupying almost half of the continent's land. And Brazil is its most populous country too. In fact, nearly 1/2 of all South Americans, or roughly 209 million people, are Brazilian.
Whenever I taught in Australia, I had a lot of Brazilian students.
Brazil is also South America's foremost exporting nation and the world's leading coffee producer. Sao Paulo, Brazil is the largest city on the continent, and Rio de Janeiro is the third largest. Perhaps the most impressive features of South America's geography are the towering Andes Mountains. They run parallel to the Pacific Ocean the entire length of the continent, and almost all of South America's indigenous people, roughly 14 million of them, live in this mountainous region. 69 peaks of the Andes exceed 20,000 feet or 6,100 meters in elevation. Over 8,000 square miles of the interior valleys of the Andes in Chile and Argentina are filled with enormous ice fields that give rise to dozens of slow-moving glaciers like this one. More water flows through the Amazon River than any other river on Earth. This vast river basin is the site of the Amazon rainforest, the world's largest rainforest, a place that is home to an incredibly biodiverse assortment of animal and plant species. Most of the Amazon basin lacks roads and is flooded for part of the year, so the relatively few people who live here generally must rely on boats to get from place to place. In terms of climate and terrain, the Atacama Desert is the complete opposite of the Amazon rainforest. This desert lies along the Pacific coast of southern Peru and northern Chile, at the western base of the Andes Mountains. The Atacama is the world's driest desert, and quite a lot of its land is nearly devoid of plant life. But even though very few people live here, the Atacama Desert is where Chile's giant copper mining industry is based. Crossing back over the Andes to the Atlantic side of the continent are two other major features of South America's geography. These are the windswept Patagonian grasslands and broad plains called the Pampas, which lie to their north. Together, these mostly flat lands make up much of the territory of Argentina, all of the territory of Uruguay, and a small portion of Brazil as well. These lands are partly used for grazing sheep and cattle. Beef is a major export of all three of these countries. The traditional ranchers of this area are known as gauchos. The plains of the Pampas are where almost all of South America's large-scale farming of its main export crops of wheat, soybeans, rice, and maize takes place. Los Llanos, a large northern area of grassy plains, are much more tropical and wetter than the southern plains and grasslands. They are located in the Orinoco Basin of Colombia and Venezuela and are used primarily for grazing cattle. Several species of animals and plants are native to the continent. These include the capybara, the world's largest rodent, guinea pigs, giant anteaters, anaconda snakes that sometimes grow to be more than 30 feet long, flesh-eating freshwater fish called piranhas, and 3 South American members of the camel family, alpacas, llamas, and guanacos.
So this is a map. You can see that this is actually North America. So it's kind of like sideways. It's kind of like you're looking at Earth from the top and it goes down. But you can see, so this would be kind of like where the U.S. is. We actually used to have camels here in the U.S. In fact, long time ago, before even probably people were here. But camels originated in North America and they spread around into Asia during the Ice Age. So what happened was there was ice. It was so cold that the ocean froze right here, and people were able, and animals both, were able to walk back and forth. So they went from America, where America is today, and they went out into Asia, where you would normally think of there being camels. Then they went down into South America, where we call them llamas or alpacas or whatever, but as they said in the video, they're actually a form of camels. And then after that, we ended up not having any camels in this part of the world. So. And then ironically, or a side note, there's actually this area of Australia where they took and brought camels for like kind of like to use as horses, because Australia is mostly desert. And then they all got loose and now they're just wild. So, but they were the camels that come from like Egypt or Northern Africa area.
Some notable native South American plants include tomatoes, potatoes, rubber trees, whose latex sap provides the raw material for goods such as tires, cacao trees, from whose pods chocolate is derived.
Right, for some reason the documentary didn't cover Antarctica, which is actually the 5th largest continent, the next in line. So we're going to do a little video about that, and then we're going to go to the 6th largest continent, which is Europe, and then back to Australia, which is the smallest continent, number 7.
It's time to open the door on some really cool science.
Antarctica holds the record for being both the coldest place ever recorded on Earth and also the place with the strongest winds. It's certainly a place of extremes.
This is support worker Christine Powell. She's at Antarctica's McMurdo Research Station.
At the research station, they categorize weather in 3 classes. Condition 3 is the mild, normal weather at McMurdo Station.
Check this out.
This is Condition 1.
We're gonna open the door right now. It's a little bit like opening up the door to another world. Are you ready?
Yes, Condition 1 means temperatures lower than minus 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And wind speeds over 115 miles per hour.
It's a little bit blowy out there right now.
Christine opened the door to 3.8 million views online. But why is this weather so bad?
Christine is witnessing these conditions because of Antarctica's geography. The sun never really rises much above the horizon, and in fact, where Christine works, it's in darkness for over 4 months of the year.
Antarctica is even colder than the Arctic. That's because the Arctic is at sea level, but Antarctica is at 9,000 feet. And at higher altitudes, it's colder.
At the centre of Antarctica is a high point called the Polar Plateau. Here, air that is in contact with the surface of the ground is continually cooled. This colder, denser air flows from this high altitude area
and picks up speed as it makes its way towards the coast. These winds are so fierce that they've actually been given their own name, which is the katabatic winds, and that's what Christine is witnessing at this station.
These extreme conditions only occur about 3 to 4 times a year, so we're happy that Christine shared them with us online.
From one extreme to another now.
Europe is the second smallest of the Earth's continents, occupying a little less than 7% of its total land area. Europe is a land where forests and farm fields abound. It's home to around 745 million people, or roughly 11% of the Earth's total population. The European continent consists of the westernmost portion of the huge landmass known as Eurasia, which it shares with the continent of Asia. Historically, Europe's cultural influence worldwide has been quite great. This is due to the fact that hundreds of years ago, certain powerful European nations carried out intensive programs of world exploration that led to their colonization of far distant lands. Because of their colonies, many aspects of European culture, including legal systems, languages, religions, art, architecture, and even ways of dress were introduced to countries all around the world. Today, the territory of the European continent is divided up into 50 independent nations, in which more than 100 native languages are spoken. Geographically, Europe's western and southern regions abound with mountainous and hilly terrain, and most of these lands are heavily forested. The Alps, which stretch across 8 different countries, are the continent's most extensive and tallest range of mountains. With the exception of the lower elevation mountain ranges of Scandinavia, Poland, and Slovakia, the majority of northern and eastern Europe consists of fairly flat plains, most of which are used for farming. Climatically, Europe receives a fairly significant amount of precipitation, and that's why the continent has so many large navigable rivers, and why it lacks any real deserts. A small percentage of Europe extends above the Arctic Circle, but most of its territory lies in the temperate zone. As a result, for the most part, the European climate is relatively mild. Nearer the Mediterranean Sea, the European climate is much warmer than in the north. However, further away from its coasts, in the continent's interior regions, more extreme temperature variations can occur, most notably during the winter months when icy continental air masses move down from the north.
All right, and here is a video about Australia, the smallest continent, but not an island, it's a continent.
Australia, an ancient land, home to an ancient people who have learned how to survive from nature. Extreme climate, incredible landscapes, unique creatures, evolving in isolation, full of wonder, magic, and danger. This is Australia, like you've never seen before. Indigenous Australian legends say that long ago the world was soft and had no form. Spirits came to the land, often appearing as animals. They created mountains, deserts, and rivers. For 50,000 years, the secrets of this wild continent belong to Earth's oldest surviving culture. The Aboriginal peoples are Australia's first inhabitants. They revere and protect many aspects of this land and its wildlife, believing them to be their ancestors. These special animals and places are known as totems and were created in the dream time. The dawn of their creation. Stories from the dream time have been handed down over tens of thousands of years. They strengthen the connections between the human and natural world.
And next we're going to learn just a little bit about the geography of Australia.
So Australia's northern areas possess a more tropical climate, while the further south you go, the climate becomes cooler and more temperate. That's why mountainous Tasmania in the southernmost part of Australia has fairly mild, pleasant weather, while the land close to the northernmost point of Australia near the Great Barrier Reef is very hot and humid. And since it's so tropical here, this is also the wettest area of the country, with an average rainfall of around 160 inches per year. Australia is a truly unique place when it comes to its animal and plant life. For example, the country is home to 70% of all the world's species of marsupials, which are by far the dominant type of native animal here. Marsupials are mammals, such as kangaroos, whose offspring are immature when they are born, and so they are carried and nursed inside a pouch on the mother's belly.
And so I used to teach in Australia. It was just for about 8 months, but when I was there, you can drive out into the country and see all kinds of, well, amazing wildlife, but so many kangaroos, and it's funny just to see them out there wild. It's just kind of like how deer are here. You might see deer just roaming around, eating grass. They're the same thing. They'll be hopping around, eating grass, especially at night. So I don't want to hit one when you're going fast with a car.
Marsupials are not well known outside of Australia. Other notable Australian marsupials include koala bears, which are perhaps the country's favorite animals. There are also the ferocious meat-eating Tasmanian devils, furry wombats, and tiny quolls. In addition to its marsupials, Australia is only one of 2 places in the world where monotremes, a rare order of egg-laying mammals, such as the echidna and the duck-billed platypus, are found living in nature. Australia is also home to some of the more typical kinds of mammals, including the wild dogs called dingoes. It has lots of dangerous reptiles too, including crocodiles and deadly venomous snakes. And the country is a truly great place to see a wide variety of parrots, parakeets, and cockatoos, all of which are quite commonplace here. The native Australian birds called emus are the second tallest birds in the world after ostriches. Emus are quite widespread in Australia, and since they are unable to fly, emus must walk or run to get from place to place. When it comes to its plant life, Australia's nearly 700 native species of eucalyptus, or gum trees, dominate the landscape across much of the country and really stand out as unique. Eucalyptus leaves are by far the favorite food of koala bears, and these animals very rarely are seen anywhere but in their branches.
Also, when I lived in Australia, we saw all of those animals, I think, at one point, wild. Some of them, I guess, saw better. They have these petting zoos and animal parks and that kind of thing. But koalas was one that I really, really wanted to see because koalas is one of my favorite animals. But we went to many places where there are supposed to be many koala bears, but for some reason that's the only animal I never saw. I remember being in the deep forest in the high desert of Victoria, where I lived, which is a state, name of a state, and just looking and looking everywhere. I mean, no one was around. No other humans, no other animals. I mean, it's just like all these eucalyptus trees, which, like they said in the video, that's where the koalas live. And just looking up and never seeing a koala. It was just the strangest thing ever. They're all over the place, don't get me wrong, but we just were unlucky, never got to see one. Unfortunately, a lot of the area what I've just referred to where we went hiking and that kind of thing ended up getting burned in the bushfires this past summer over there, which would be winter here. So that's unfortunate, but I'm glad we got to go and see it before everything burned down. I mean, everything will regenerate because Australia is unique in the sense that fire is very natural there. And if some trees, in fact, in Australia won't even make seeds or regrow unless they burn in a forest fire. They call them bushfires. All right, and finally, we have Oceania, Polynesia, that part of the world. It's not a continent, but it's usually considered a world region and often considered to be part of Australia or Australia and Oceania.
The huge expanse of the Pacific Ocean is dotted with about 25,000 islands spread out across more than 181 million square kilometers. The area is called Oceania. Geographers group the islands of Oceania into three main regions: Melanesia, Micronesia, and Polynesia. Melanesia, which includes the country of Papua New Guinea, has by far the greatest land area and largest population. Fertile soils along Melanesian coastlines can be used to produce export crops such as sugarcane, cacao from which chocolate is made, and copra or dried coconut meat. The interiors of most Melanesian islands are mountainous and are covered with dense rainforests. People in these areas are subsistence farmers who grow only enough food to feed their families, plus a little extra to sell in village markets. Micro means small, and Micronesia is made up of about 2,000 tiny islands that lie north of Melanesia and east of the Philippines. Most Micronesian islands are made out of coral and do not rise very far above the sea. Few have significant resources other than some coconut trees and the sea life in the surrounding ocean.
It's kind of true, but kind of not true. So one resource that was kind of funny that was very, very valuable probably 40 years ago or something, back in the 1970s, is guano, which is actually bird poop. So that over thousands of years, the birds would stop on these little islands and they'd poop and it'd get piled up and that would become part of the island. And so there's one island, I forget the name of it, but there's a cool video on YouTube about it where they actually dug up all the bird poop, the old bird poop, and they sold it to make fertilizer. But then they ran out of bird poop and now the whole country is like destroyed.
The name Polynesia comes from poly, which means many. Polynesia also has numerous islands. Polynesian island groups stretch from the Hawaiian Islands on the north to the islands of Tonga on the southwest and remote Easter Island on the southeast. Many Polynesian islands originated from volcanic activity and have steep mountains that rise high above the Pacific.
All right, so let's go ahead and review, and then after that, there is another video from Edgenuity that we'll need you to watch. It's a lecture, but first of all, the continents, North America. Let's put in the chat one thing you remember from North America that was interesting. We didn't talk too much about it because we live here, but one famous thing about North America. Go ahead and type that in the chat right now. And let's pause the video for that. All right, and then one famous thing or thing you remember about South America. Go ahead and put that in the chat right now. All right, and one important thing you remember about Africa. Let's put that in the chat, please. Okay, next, Europe. One neat fact about Europe that you remember. Okay. All right, next in the chat, let's put an important or interesting fact you remember about Asia. And lastly, Australia and Oceania both together. Neat facts you remember about those. All right, and that is all for today. Like I said, next we're going to watch the lecture video from Edgenuity, which is kind of a review of what we talked about on Tuesday.